Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Living Traditions Homestead. It is going to be a hot, humid day here in the Ozarks. We had a storm roll through overnight. Luckily, we didn't really have much damage. I do see a little bit of damage in the back of the garden, not with the plants, but with our fencing. So we're going to need to fix that a little bit today. But other than that, I don't see any real damage.
Today we're going to start bringing you along with chores. And then we have a couple things to talk with you about regarding our in-ground garden right here. You guys have not seen this garden since the day we planted it. Today we need to show you how well or not well it's doing.
But first, let's get started on morning animal chores. Good morning, dogs. Good morning, geese. There you go.
Good morning, Silkies. Morning, chickens. Morning, chickens. Good morning, breast baby chicks. You're all set. Have a great day. Are you ready for breakfast? I have a variety of things for you this morning. Well, out of the way.
Well, chores are all done. Everybody is doing well, and they're preparing for the hot day that's about to come. It's supposed to be in the mid-90s today, and because we got rain overnight, it is extra humid. But it'll be fine. All the animals have plenty to drink. The ones that need extra shade have extra shade, and everybody's doing great.
What we want to do today is show you and talk with you about our in-ground garden that we have behind us here. You guys haven't seen this garden since the day we planted it.
And there are several reasons for that. We've been focusing a lot of our attention in the growing season this year on the greenhouse. We've showed you guys a lot about the greenhouse and how well that is doing. In fact, we did a video recently where we did a big harvest in the greenhouse, and a lot of you were asking, what's going on with your outside garden and why haven't we seen that? You guys, the truth is that the outside garden isn't doing amazing, and there are several reasons for that. And the other reason we haven't showed it, honestly, is because we've been a little bit embarrassed at the condition of it. We'll talk to you a little bit more about that once we get inside, but let's go inside. We're going to walk through the garden row by row and show you what's going on.
So today what we're going to do is really go row by row through the garden to show how well or not well the things are doing that we planted here. Now, before we get started, Kevin had mentioned, you know, we're kind of embarrassed about the condition of this garden, and really what happened is, you know, we got busy, things happened, illnesses in families and all, in illnesses with Kevin, and we had to kind of prioritize and pick what we were going to pay the most attention to and what balls needed to drop. And in this situation and in this season of our life, that was our in-ground garden. Now, I want to review that earlier in the summer, I guess late spring, our daughter Grace got married, and so a lot of time and effort went into preparing our property for the wedding, preparing everything for that. It was a wonderful time. We had lots of visitors come, and everything turned out great. Shortly after that, Kevin's dad and then Kevin's mom, they both got COVID. And so we were just kind of maintaining everything that we could, just kind of status quo on the homestead, just to make sure that they were going to be okay. We were taking meals over to them, making sure their medical care was appropriate. And then Kevin got a tick-borne illness. He did a video about that where he just got so sick with what the doctors think was ehrlichiosis. He was on antibiotics and was healing for several weeks. And during all of that time, he was down and out, not able to help, and I could just do only the minimum, which is a lot for one person. And long story short, this garden has gotten the brunt of our neglect, and so it has become overgrown, and really overgrown with weeds. But I want to show you something. You know, you all know that we've been using this weed fabric for a long time, probably 6 or more years. And the fact that this garden has become overgrown with weeds isn't the fault of the weed fabric, and I want to show you this. This row here, we had brassicas in the spring. We pulled them out, and our intention was to cover this row up with another piece of weed fabric, a 3-foot piece of weed fabric, to cover these holes. We have intentionally made holes for planting in every one of these rows. And when you don't cover it with weed fabric and where you don't have a big plant growing, the weeds grow. So everywhere in this row and in rows along the line, everywhere that you see weeds is because there is a hole in the weed fabric. It's not the fault of the weed fabric. You can see here is an intentional hole, and that is where those weeds are growing. So the weed fabric is doing its job. We just didn't do our job. We had lots of things coming up, had to prioritize, and weeding the garden didn't make the cut. So as we get going through the rest of the garden and show you, the weed issue is where we dropped the ball and we were unable to keep up with it.
All right, let's start here with our row of tomatoes. Now this year out here, we kind of did a mismatch of tomatoes. Basically, we took tomato plants that didn't sell at the farmer's market to grow out here in the in-ground garden. And they're doing okay. As you can see, I mean, the plants themselves are growing, they're surviving. I definitely would not say that they're thriving out here. And really, that's because of the condition of our soil. You can see that for the most part, there aren't a lot of weeds in this row because the tomato plants have kind of shaded the weeds out. So even in the little holes with the tomato plants, there aren't a lot of weeds. But the plants themselves, I would say, are only surviving. We have harvested some tomatoes, and there are some green ones still on here. But you guys, the soil here on this homestead, unlike our first homestead that we sold recently, the soil here is all clay and really pretty much gravel and clay mixed together. It's very hard, it's very compact, and we have very poor drainage here. So with all of that being said, these tomatoes are doing okay, but they're definitely not anywhere near the level of the tomatoes that we're getting out of the greenhouse. Now, the tomatoes in the greenhouse are also about a month ahead of these, but I really don't think these tomatoes are going to get much bigger at this point. I think at this point, they're pretty much as big as they're going to get. So this is really where we're at with tomatoes. It's going to be an okay tomato harvest out here in the garden, but definitely not an exceptional harvest. All right, let's move on to the next row here. And you can see that this next row is pretty much gone. Now in this row, we had planted gourds. Sarah was actually really excited to do these ornamental gourds this year because she wanted to be able to decorate our new house with a lot of these gourds in the fall. Unfortunately, like again, because of the poor soil, the hard clay soil, we just had very poor germination in this row. In fact, after we planted this row of gourds, we were so concerned about how hard the soil was that we made some different decisions as we moved on throughout the garden, and we'll talk to you about that. So last week I came through here. I was going to try to weed this row to find all of the gourd plants, and you guys, to be honest, there were only 3 plants in this entire row that had actually germinated, and they really weren't doing well. And in fact, they were starting to get covered in squash bugs. So we made the decision just to pull those plants out, and then I mowed this row down with the lawnmower to get rid of the weeds.
This next row are all beans. They're called purple potted pole beans. We wanted to try a pole variety this year. In contrast to all the other years, we've done just bush contender beans. We did do bush contender beans in the greenhouse and they did well, but we wanted to try a pole bean. Number one, to see if we liked it and to see if we would get bigger harvests in the same amount of space. And you know, guys, as we get older, we're not gonna wanna stoop down, bend down and harvest on our hands and knees or crouched over. We wanna be able to do some of that standing up, and so we decided this year to try this variety. Now, they're doing really great. They're producing a lot of these purple beans you can see here. Later this evening, I think I'm going to do a harvest of these beans. Now, in my experience, beans don't need the most amazing soil to grow in. In fact, they can do pretty well in pretty terrible soil, which is one of the reasons I think these are doing pretty well, and I'm happy about that. But a couple seconds ago, Kevin told you that we decided to do something different when we were planting seeds because we were concerned about the gourds not germinating, which they didn't. What we ended up doing is every hole that we planted a seed in, now these are planted every 6 inches, every hole we kind of drilled out and put potting soil, compost combination down in every single hole so that we knew it was a loose medium for them to germinate in. And you guys, I mean, the proof is in the pudding here. I mean, they did a great job germinating, and it got them off to a good enough start that they could grow. Now, we're not kidding ourselves. The soil down underneath and away from where we drilled out and put the potting soil compost mix, you know, that's still hard. They're doing well enough and they're succeeding, so we're happy about that. Now, we are happy enough with this type of bean, the purple potted pole bean. Kevin loves the flavor of them raw. We're probably going to grow these again in the future. But overall, despite our neglect and despite the terrible soil, they're doing really well. We're pretty pleased with them.
Next up is the okra. Now, as you can see, the okra is pretty well taken over by weeds as well, but the okra plants themselves are doing pretty well. So I will get out here yet and try to do some weeding around these plants. I think I'll be able to do an okay job, but all in all, the plants are doing well, even competing with the weeds, so I'm not too worried about it. We have started harvesting a few okra off of these. Mainly at this point, we're harvesting okra out of the greenhouse, but these are a variety that we're trying for the first time this year, and I'm impressed with the way they're doing despite kind of the weed pressure and everything else. These are a dwarf variety, and it's something that I'm excited to try. So I do think, so far from what I can tell, they're doing well, and the flavor of the few that I've picked have been very, very good. At the other end of this row is where we have cucumbers. Now, they pretty much have completely gotten taken over by the weeds. Now, unfortunately, during the time that I was sick, is the time that we should have been out here kind of training these cucumber plants to climb up these trellises. Cucumber plants, for the most part, don't climb trellises on their own. You kind of have to train them initially, and then they'll climb from there on by themselves. But because we didn't do that, they just started growing on the ground, and then the weeds started to come in, and for the most part, the cucumbers just really didn't do much because the weeds took over. Now, we did have a great cucumber harvest in the greenhouse, so that was a real blessing. And we still have time in the greenhouse to plant a second round of cucumbers. So we're going to try this same variety that we had out here in the greenhouse for fall. These are called Bait Alpha cucumbers, and I was really excited to try them, and I do hope that they will do really well in the greenhouse in the fall.
Well, this area over here is kind of a jungle, and I'd say that overall these plants are doing pretty well. Now, farthest from me and closest to Kevin, we have some watermelon plants that are growing there. I haven't seen any baby watermelons yet, but this area is so covered in leaves it's kind of hard to see. We also planted Canada crookneck squash, which is a butternut type squash that we have planted almost every year. And I have been able to see quite a few squash growing in there, so that's exciting. And then I think that we planted 2 types of pumpkins. I'm seeing pumpkins from one of them for sure, and I think it's called the New England cheese pumpkin. Several of those, they're looking fantastic, and I'm really excited about those because they are like an eating pumpkin, like a baking pumpkin. And then I think we've planted like a jack-o'-lantern variety, and I think that was actually the name of it. And I think it was over here at the end. Now, I haven't seen any of them yet, but like I said, this area is completely filled with leaves, so it's hard to see. There is still a lot of summer left and early fall, and so I am anticipating quite a few pumpkins. I'm really excited. Between the 2 varieties, I'm really excited. So I do want to let you know that the method of us taking out some of the native soil and replacing it with the potting soil compost mix, that is the method that we used here also, and I really do think that's the reason why we had a decent germination over here and a good start for these plants. I also want to say that, you know, we have failed to mention that in this growing season we've had 2 rounds of hail. And these leaves and the leaves of some of the other plants are really showing the damage of the hail. It could be why some of our tomatoes, the actual fruits, aren't looking the best because of hail damage. But that's another thing that we experienced here in this garden. You can see here on these pumpkin leaves, this is all hail damage here. And I'm noticing some on the okra plants over here. Right here, this is hail damage on these okra leaves. Here's hail damage on the beans, and there's, you know, damage other places on the beans. So we're not trying to make excuses. No, we didn't pick many of the weeds and some things got out of control, but there have been several reasons why this garden hasn't been the most amazing garden this year.
So there you go, you guys. That's kind of the overall condition of the garden. Now, we did have something pretty major that we wanted to talk to you guys about gardening going forward here on the homestead. There have been a lot of things that have gone into this decision that, you know, we've been thinking about for a long, long time, really since we moved on to this new property. And so we've come to the conclusion that after this year, we will be switching the majority of our gardening over to raised bed gardening.
We've had the opportunity to do kind of raised bed gardening in the greenhouse, and you know, everything is doing so well over there because the soil is under our control, and it's so good. The soil is just good soil.
Right.
And we really think that we'll see a huge difference in the quality and the health of our plants outside if we switch over to raised beds.
Right. Like I said earlier, we really don't have any topsoil here on this piece of ground. And really, for the most part, anywhere on this homestead, it's clay and gravel is what the ground is. And yes, we could spend the next 5 or 10 years trying to amend the soil here in the ground in order to get a good area to garden in. Or we could just switch over to raised beds and pretty much have good soil starting already next year. So we've decided after a lot of thought that that is the direction that we're going to go. We're excited about that. There's a lot of benefits, I think, to that, as we've seen in the greenhouse. When we have control over the soil, we really can kind of influence how the plants are going to grow.
Now, we haven't made all the decisions yet. We don't know like what type of raised beds we're going to do, if we're going to build them ourselves out of wood, if we're going to get some kind of kits. We have to think about trellising and supporting plants, how we're going to do that.
Right.
So there's a lot for us to learn and a lot for us to consider. But we do really feel confident moving that direction, not only because of the soil, but ease of our bodies as we get older, not having to bend down and stoop and that stuff as we get older.
Right. I also think that by doing raised beds, we'll be able to produce a lot of the compost from year to year that we will need to amend those beds every year. But trying to amend a garden this size with compost or even manure that we produce here ourselves is a really big task. By doing raised beds, we'll only need to amend the spots that we're actually growing in instead of amending even the spots that we walk in and everything else.
So we may end up shortening this growing season depending on how things are going. We may end up taking out these plants earlier than normal so that we can actually get going on this project before it gets too cold and the weather gets too crummy.
Right. Our goal is to get the raised beds in place yet this summer or fall so that we can fill them and let whatever we put in there age kind of over winter. There's a place not too far from here where we can buy bulk organic compost. That is what we plan on filling, at least partially filling those beds with, but it is best to let that rest. So if we can get that yet this fall, let it rest over winter and then plant in it next spring, we think that's the direction that it's going to be best.
We know that this is a big change from what we have done in the past, what we've talked about in the past, but we think that going forward, the raised beds are going to be good.
For a long time, I was really kind of against the whole raised bed thing, thinking that we wouldn't be able to grow the quantity of food that we needed, but the more that I've researched it and the more that I see what we're able to produce in the greenhouse, because the plants do so much better, we can get away with fewer plants with the same amount of harvest, which really should be the goal of every homestead.
So you guys, that is the update on our in-ground garden. It isn't what we had hoped at the beginning of the year, but you know what? Things happen and things come up. We need to prioritize family and let some things go, and this is what we were able to let go at the time. Now this might not be our best garden ever, but we have had some amazing gardens, and you guys, our greenhouse is outperforming our expectations, and we're pleased with that, and this garden still will be providing us food.
Right. We like to show you guys a true picture of what it's like living on a homestead, and while we very easily could have just never done a video about all of this and, at the end of the season just pretended like it never happened, we want to show you guys that, life happens sometimes and things get out of control or things don't do as well as you had planned. And we hope that you appreciate that about our channel, that we're not going to sugarcoat things. We're definitely going to celebrate our wins when we have a win, like I feel like we're having in the greenhouse this year. But we're also going to learn from the mistakes that we've made, or at least show you what's going on, so that if some similar things happen to you, you're not watching videos like this and thinking, how come everybody on YouTube is perfect all the time? As you can see, we're not perfect all the time.
You guys, we want to thank you so much for joining us today to do chores in the morning and then come out with us to see what has been going on in the in-ground garden. If you're enjoying our videos, we sure hope that you would hit that subscribe button. And also, the best way that you can help us here on the homestead is just to share our videos on your social media. Until next time, thank you so much for stopping by our homestead. Take care and God bless.
God bless.